To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meier Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meier Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Kristin Walker here, and I'm with Melanie Van. Hey, Melanie.
Hey, Kristin.
And we are doing one of our roundtable discussions with Dr. Paul Meier. Paul, welcome back. We took a little bit of a break.
Hello, Kristin. Hello, Melanie. Hello, listening family. Great to be back.
Yeah.
Oh, hey.
So we found an article. It's written by one of our podcasters. She does Heal, Grow, Evolve with Kim. Her name's Kim Said, and she wrote this great article. It's short, concise, to the point, and we're gonna go into it. And I think it fits in with how we're manipulated. The article that Kim wrote is called "These 7 Traits Make You Vulnerable to Narcissistic Manipulation." And the reason why I like it and that it's relevant is because in today's world, where we are so plugged in, there are more ways for us to be manipulated than ever before. And so email, social media accounts, and there's just ways for people to get at you that are very narcissistic because there's more access to you because of this online lives that we have. So when I'm reading this article and we start going through it, and I say the first sentence in the article is, some people find themselves in a relationship with a narcissist, claw their way out, and do their best to write off or avoid other narcissists for the rest of their lives. Others are simply magnets for narcissists. They ditch one romantic relationship with a narcissist only to find themselves in new abusive situations just months later, or perhaps they continue to put up with narcissistic abuse from coworkers or family members. The reason why I add the online piece. Yeah, exactly. And I add the online piece to that because, before this world that we have now, the abuse was horrible. It was in person. It was through your family. It was not as available to get at you as it is today. So I want people to remember that. Yes, we're talking about Tinder, dating apps online, all the ways that people can Facebook message you, text you, email you, all of that comes into play today when we're talking about this. It's not just romantic relationships. It's in many different kinds of relationships, a lot more access to get at you. So when we look at that piece, that's interesting to me is the magnets for narcissists. There'll be a lot of people out there that get ticked when they hear that because they feel like that's victim shaming or victim blaming. And I don't know if that's a term.
And we're not really blaming them. They're not doing it on purpose. But I see people every week that have been, as a psychiatrist, that have been abused, and then they're continue to be abused as adults. And when I ask them, like, if somebody's had 4 or 5 boyfriends in a row that all were abusive, then I say, well, you're an intelligent person and all that. Why do you think you put up with that? And I know what the answer is going to be, but when we look at their childhood a little bit, then almost always they got abused in childhood, so they got used to being abused. And when you're a child and you get abused, you feel like you deserve to be abused, and you don't. After a while, you give up on fighting it and you just put up with it. And so I think abusers can sort of sense that in people. They can, I don't know how they sniff it out, but they can find somebody that has a passive look or a passive attitude, or or something, and they can go up to that person and know that they can abuse that person and get away with it. Whereas if that same person grew up in a home where he or she was really loved and respected and things like that, then they wouldn't put up with abuse. If they got abused one time, they'd tell that person to go hit the road. And so, they become abuse magnets with no intention to do it. They just are too passive to fight it because they think they can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless Melanie treats them. And if she treats them, then they know how to fight it.
Yeah,
Listen, I learned the hard way, unfortunately. I learned the hard way.
Right. Personal experience. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you read that next sentence, narcissist and empathy, Melanie, and it says it's a common misconception that narcissists lack empathy and that they hurt you using cognitive empathy. What does that mean?
Cognitive empathy basically means they know when you're supposed to have empathy. And so they do have enough awareness that they know how they're supposed to feel, so they can act and pretend like they care and like they know where you're coming from and like they're empathetic. But in reality, the actual feeling is not there. So it's literally just a cognitive thought. It's not emotional or feeling based. So that's what cognitive empathy is. And it can be very, very convincing when you have, a narcissist that really understands how to manipulate their own empathy to convince someone else that they really care, because in reality, they just don't. The feeling is not there. They do not have a capacity to care. It can be very deceiving.
Paul, what do you think about that?
Yeah, Melanie's exactly right. And if somebody has legitimate empathy, if one of you suffered a loss or got in an accident or something like that, I mean, I would feel I would grieve, I would feel sad, I would cry, and I'd have legitimate empathy, whether I was all alone by myself or talking to one of you on the phone. But a narcissist, if you see somebody that's suffering, he thinks of it as an opportunity. He or she sees it as an opportunity to get in good graces with that person so they can manipulate them more then or later.
Right.
So
I like this.
They'll act empathetic.
Exactly. I like the next sentence. Torturers use cognitive empathy to get inside their victims' heads and cause unspeakable pain.
Yes.
And I always, some people that have been extremely narcissistic to varying degrees in my life have definitely been able to pick out what my weaknesses are. And in the beginning, they used that knowledge because they're good at it to befriend me or try to do business with me or whatever. And then the minute that, the table flipped and they wanted to start gaining control, or I was starting to catch on to them, it can happen either way, they turn around and use those things that they figured out about me as weapons to try to take me down or have me feel bad about myself or be in control of my mental health or whatever it was, my company, whatever it was, which I find kind of fascinating that they use that information for knowing you, and then they use it to punish you.
Yeah, it's all part of the psychological manipulation that happens with people that are psychopaths and sociopaths. This is how they get into people's minds. This is how some of the greatest schemes on the face of the earth have occurred, is because they have the ability to have that cognitive empathy and to get inside your head and to make you think that you care, because that's when you really start to let your guard down. So a lot of narcissists are master manipulators, and that's how they do it. They play on what they know your strengths are, and one of those is empathy, and they use it against you. And that's why it is so confusing when you find yourself in the middle of one of these relationships. You don't even really know how you got there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
They
Paul, when
pretend
you
like they
go ahead.
pretend like they love you. They pretend. They'll ask you to share your whatever your sufferings are with them, and they'll act empathetic to when so you'll have a good view of that person, and then they'll develop a relationship with you based on who you think that person is, but they really aren't. And then if you break up with that person, then they want to kill you. You know, if you really love
Yes.
somebody, you know what I mean? If you really love somebody, then you want what's best for them, even if it's somebody else.
Yeah, you don't want to
I mean,
destroy
if you
them.
really love somebody, you want what's best for them, and that means if you think somebody else would be a better match for them than you are, you really want that actually,
Right.
because
Right.
you'd rather have somebody that's better for them than you would be. But a narcissist will act like he loves you, but if he loses you, he just as soon kill you. So that's not
Right.
that's not love.
Exactly. So let's go through the 7 traits that can make you more susceptible. It doesn't mean that you can't get to a place where you're not a magnet, where you're not susceptible, and we're all susceptible. We all can be. Even prolific writers about this and psychiatrists and so on, that this is their specialty, will say, hey, I would never say that I can't be fooled. I would be a fool to say that. But how quickly they figure out what's going on is the difference. So, yeah, yes, yeah, I have it happen too. So number 1, you're trusting and have integrity. So we've talked about that before, and we know what integrity is. And, we give people break our trust in one way or another. We're very forgiving, and then we want to help people because we think they have some issue. And, you do get to a point, and this is what I want to ask the two of you. I'll start with you, Paul. You can have trust and you can have integrity at the same time as being very shrewd about who and what you give your energy to. It doesn't make you a less open or less loving person to be shrewd, probably because you've been caught up in these kind of relationships and you've just learned, I'm not going to just lay the table out for anybody anymore. So, Paul, what do you think about that?
My dad used to tell me when I was growing up, first of all, some guy with obsessive compulsive disorder counted how many verses there were in the Bible. I've told you this before, I think, to see which one was in the middle. And the middle verse in the Bible, it's in Psalm somewhere, is don't put your trust in man. So don't trust people. Doesn't mean you can't trust anybody, but my dad used to tell me when I was growing up, he'd say, Paul, don't trust anybody until you've shared a bushel of salt with them. In other words, you've had so many meals together that you got to know each other so well that you've used up an entire bushel of salt on the meals. So I mean, that'd be a little waiting too long. But I grew up in a home that was very, very honest and had a lot of integrity, and I mean, I don't remember cheating on any tests, or I wasn't sinless, but I was very honest, and so because of that, later on in life, when I became a psychiatrist, there's this guy. I don't want to go into detail because I don't want, if he's listening, I don't want him to sue me or anything. But anyway, there's this guy that I really trusted, and he seemed so trustworthy, and he was real smart, and I invested my money with him, and that's when I was making a lot back then, when I was selling a lot of books and things, when I was on the radio every day.
Mm-hmm.
And he just ended up taking it. I mean, I just lost everything, and because I thought, since I have integrity, then he must too.
Right.
And I think people that are honest are easier to take advantage of than people that are. I think people that are crooks can tell if somebody else is being a crook.
Right.
Probably, I would guess that better. But those of us who are honest, it's a little bit harder to tell when people are lying to us. Don't you think?
Yeah, that goes right into number 2, but I want to get Melanie's thoughts on that one before we move to number 2.
Well, I mean, I love what Kim Saeed has to say here, and because this is how I am. And this is where I think, this is how I think we can get blindsided, especially, an empath can get blindsided by a narcissist, is because we are a way that we can't see out of. So I think, and exactly what I do is I naturally trust people until they give me a reason not to trust them.
Right.
So,
That's wrong.
that's it's backwards. It shouldn't be that way. But you're working from this place of integrity yourself, and so you literally can't really imagine, or you don't have a perception that someone else would have, motives that were not pure or are not honest, because your motives are honest, and you just put everything out there. So you literally can't relate to someone that doesn't, because it's just so who you are. And so again, the narcissist takes the very essence of who you are and uses it against you. And I think that's why it could be so confusing for you to be in the middle of a relationship with one of these people and not even really understand how you got there. So they totally use it against you. And then even when you catch them in their lies, they're going to use your integrity against you to get them to believe them again. I mean, that gaslighting starts from day one.
Right.
I know you understand that, Kristin. Yeah, it starts from day one. They start manipulating who you are against you. They use it against yourself. So it just becomes confusing, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to share a really great quote that I just thought of from Townsend and Cloud. For those in our listening family who don't know, John Townsend and Henry Cloud are two of the top psychologists in the country, I believe, and they've written a series of books on boundaries that have sold millions of copies and everything. But I just remembered a quote that they say about this. They said, "You can give somebody love, but you never should give trust. Trust has to be earned."
Yeah.
You can give somebody love, but you don't ever give trust. Trust has to be earned over a long period of time.
Yeah. Oh boy, I learned that the hard way. That goes right into number 2. So number 2, you value equality and treat others with respect. You believe that relationships are a 50-50 experience, and you treat others the way you'd like to be treated. Narcissists use their cognitive empathy to get in your head and exploit your compassionate empathy. And what makes it so difficult is, what we've been talking about, where you're shocked at the first time they disrespect you, because in the beginning you're just the cat's meow, and everything about you is the sun, the moon, and the stars, which now when people do that to me, I immediately don't trust them. Where in the past I was like, wow, bing, target, So if I start getting a cavity right away at how much they're saying nice things to me, then I definitely pull back immediately and go, what's the game here? Is there a game? Whatever. But in the past, I just was like, oh, this is wonderful. How wonderful to be loved and respected like that. So it's a naivete that you have to go through, so that valuing equality and treating others with respect. I guess what I want to look at here, Paul, is the ability for people who are extremely empathetic, who are not narcissistic to the degree that everybody has narcissistic qualities, but these are at the core really good, empathetic, caring people that don't try to abuse others. How you can maintain your value of equality and treating others with respect, but also being very aware that there are predators out there, and that you're just going to be very well boundaried. So, because some people I've heard when they first start going through, when they first start figuring out that they're getting into these kind of relationships, they feel very angry for a while at a loss of innocence.
Mm-hmm.
at the life that they had before, where they were a little bit in la la or a lot in la la land. And they're very angry about having that taken, quote unquote, away from them. And they look at that as a bad thing. Now there's this damage, and they feel like that something was stolen from them. And I used to think that too. And I don't think that anymore. I think I got some awesome tools that I carry around in a tool bag with me that now help me navigate life in a much healthier way. Nothing was taken from me. But what do you think, Paul?
When you're young, at least, when I was young, maybe about 1600 decades ago, when I was young, I used to believe, pretty much, even though the Bible never taught that, you still tend to believe in the basic goodness of mankind, that most people are really good. And, this is talking about the golden rule: treat others as you would want to be treated yourself. When I see a patient and I can't decide exactly what medication to give them, I ask myself, and I told somebody that today, let's see, what would I want you to give me if you were my psychiatrist right now?
Mm-hmm.
I said, I think I'd want you to do this. So I think that's what we ought to try. But when you get older, you find out that there are a lot of people that are dishonest and narcissistic and lie to you and things like that. And I remember how discouraged I was in my psychiatric training when I saw a study where they interviewed 100,000 people going through shopping malls and asked them different questions about morality and things. And one of the questions was, would you steal from your neighbor if you knew you wouldn't get caught? Would you steal from your neighbor if you were 100% sure you wouldn't get caught? And 75% said they would. 75%. That's shocking to me, And it's just when you see how much corruption there is in the world, and I guess cops see it, and psychiatrists and therapists see it, and I guess if you've been through enough hurts, you see it too. So like you said, that you lose that, you grieve over the loss of that innocent view you had of the world, that people are all basically good.
Yeah,
there are a lot of good people in the world, but not necessarily in the majority.
Exactly. Melanie, what do you think about that? Because we hear it all the time too, especially with our show. People, and you and I both have said we were just so angry, like, how dare they take that away from me? And you get through that stage and you come out the other side. It takes a while, but you do get through it and you realize, okay, nothing was taken away from me that didn't need to go away.
Yeah, well, I think what you have to realize, and I definitely went through that stage too, but I think about it a little bit differently. But I think you get to the other side where you realize that nothing was taken from you, but everything was given to you. As painful as it was, you gained what you needed to gain in your life to come away with true happiness. Because when we're not living in reality, or if we can't see things truthfully, or we're blindly believing in something that isn't there, then, that's going to stop us from having the things that we really want out of life. So, I definitely got to the other side of things where I was like, nothing was taken from me, but everything was given to me, because I just, have been able to get to a very different point in my life. And I wasn't blind to evil in the world. I'd experienced it myself, as a child. And so I knew it was there, but because of those defense mechanisms, I had this deep belief that love conquered all. Mm-hmm. Right. And so what for me, the most painful part was that, that I couldn't love this person enough to, quote, make them change. Or that no matter how much I did or how much I prayed or whatever I did, that it just wouldn't change it. So this idea of, well, love conquers all became false to me. Mm. And that's not the truth. And who wouldn't grieve that, right? The Bible tells us that love is, love and hope conquers all. So So it was just, to me, it's a perception thing. It's how you perceive things. And you know that being in relationships with these people really messes with your perception. So I think if you can, dig through all the lies and falseness that they've somehow gotten into your head with all of their fake empathy and all these other tricks they have up their sleeve, then you can get to the truth of what you really learned. And when you get to that, I truly believe you're given everything back and then some. You just have to work through the grief. And that's really hard not to get angry and bitter. And unfortunately, a lot of people stay stuck there.
Yes, that angry, bitter stage.
Great attitude, Connie.
Yeah.
That's a great attitude.
Yeah.
None of us wants to get burned.
No.
On the other hand, we don't want to spend the rest of our lives naive either. And it's better to get burned a little than be naive the rest of your life and get burned a lot later.
Yeah.
Better to get burned a little now than a lot later.
Yeah. Let's talk for a second. We're moving into number 4. You love unconditionally. Here's an interesting thing that, people that have been through these different types of things. Some people, it happened one time in their life that they got involved with a deceptive person who was, predator in some way or another. And then that was enough. Because they grew up in a very loving home and, they've learned their lesson and they run into people like that, but no one can pull the wool over their eyes as much as the one. And then there are those of us who grew up with this kind of behavior. And so we have it over and over again. How we sort of move out of that, it seems like sometimes the road can be like this. You continue to have people in your life that are extremely narcissistic, and one of them at one point in your life just shakes you to your core. And the worst thing you can do if it's a dating experience is jump right back into dating, because you're really still too vulnerable and damaged to make good decisions about who you've picked, because you're still dealing with the wounds of this other relationship. So you get in another one and you get another one, you get another one. And what can happen for people is who they pick can become progressively worse. A worse narcissist. Treat them, worse. And then they learn the lesson that I really need to do some work here. And then they pick progressively less worse people until it's not really an issue in their life that they worry about. They know that some are going to come in, they figure it out. And, those people are absconded with in peaceful way as possible. But it seems like there's this road that you have to take when you've had this happen over and over again. And a lot of that plays into that unconditional love piece, because if you weren't loved unconditionally as a child, you are absolutely a magnet for narcissists well on into your adulthood. But I wanted to get your opinion on that, Paul.
Oh, one thing I wanted to say, that there are people who grew up in homes where they were loved a lot, and so they're not necessarily a magnet for narcissists, except that they're more maybe gullible, that they think other people love unconditionally. But some people end up with a narcissist because they had bad luck, and it's not always due to some psychological reason and things like that. But usually, if somebody ends up with a narcissist because of bad luck, once they figure out that the person's really being mean and selfish and not who they thought they were, they break up with them and they're more careful the next time they learn. Whereas somebody that either suffered a lot of abuse in childhood or somewhere else along the line, like if they had an abusive parent, they may be unconsciously attracted to narcissists over and over again because they want to fix the dad or the mom that was narcissistic, or they want somebody like that mom or dad that never loved them to love them. And so if somebody grows up without being unconditionally loved hardly at all, if they grow up being conditionally loved, then they may be attracted to people that conditionally love, like narcissists, either because they missed that or they want to fix that, or they're so bitter that they want to get vengeance on somebody like that. So, those are 3 possible motives there.
Oh, that's a good point. Yes. Melanie, what do you think about that unconditional love piece?
Yeah, I'm so glad Paul said that, because as I was reading what Kim had written, I was like, well, only God loves unconditionally. And for an empath to think that they can love unconditionally is equally narcissistic, in my opinion. Which, we've talked about how it can be two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think back into the relationship that I had, and I wouldn't say that I loved unconditionally. It was just that my empathy was used against me, because there were definitely times when red flags flew up, and I made boundaries. I made healthy, logical boundaries. I hadn't been in relationships that were narcissistic. I just ended up in one. And when I would point out the negative behavior on behalf of the narcissist, there was always a sob story that would trigger my empathy and my kindness, and then I would forgive and give another chance. And and so it wasn't like I was just blindly going along and loving them no matter what they did. I called it out every time it happened, but then somehow, this empathy that I have for people and want to understand was just used against me. So I'm not, sometimes I think you can kind of love unconditionally with really unhealthy boundaries, and that can definitely get you in situations with a narcissist. But, sometimes it's just a little bit more complicated. So, and that's something that I want to come across in this entire interview, is that these relationships are complicated. There's no black and white. There's no, oh, you were abused as a kid, that's why you end up with a narcissist.
Yeah. Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meier of the Meier Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meier Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
Every relationship, every single one of these relationships is unique and different. And we don't ever want our listeners to think that we're pigeonholing you, because we don't know what our listeners' stories have been. Right. And we don't know all the ins and outs of the relationship, and that it's just so incredibly complicated. But on the larger scheme of things, knowing these things about yourself will certainly help you, hopefully, from getting into another relationship with someone like that. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Okay. Number 5 is you're honest and compassionate. That being a trait that could make you a magnet. So, and I don't even like using that word, a magnet, because there's so many different things that, come into that. But something that narcissistic people are looking for often are people who really pride themselves on being honest and compassionate people. And they want to exploit that. They're not genuine, but oftentimes a very narcissistic person will have really good, honest, and compassionate people vouching for them. And that's how they use people or organizations to do the stuff that they do, because they can't stand up on their own. They've got to bring, someone who is honest and compassionate along with them. And that's, and they utilize that in order to defraud other people. So sometimes when I look at someone and I see that they so believe in someone that I can see right through, I think, oh, that's going to be a rough one when that really nice person figures that out. What do you think about that, Paul?
Yeah, I'm looking at these 7 points here, and what the author said here, that in the beginning, the narcissist will pretend to appreciate your honesty and your compassion, but in his head or her head, they're thinking, how can I use this to manipulate? And So he'll try to get you, because you're honest, he'll try to get you to talk about your feelings and about the bad things that happened to you in your life and all that stuff. They want you to be vulnerable and tell them all those things, trauma from your past, things like that. And the narcissist will freely dig up all of that every time they need to carry out narcissistic manipulation tactics to exploit your genuine and very valid emotions. But they don't hate your honesty. They love to exploit it every chance they get. And so as you share things, they'll either use them to take empathy or to manipulate you or get you to feel sorry. They'll tell you things that aren't even true, so you'll feel compassion for them and want to do what they want you to do because you feel so sorry for them.
Yeah, I've had a lot of married people or people in a monogamous relationship but they are extremely narcissistic, will tell whoever it is that they're wanting to, add as a romantic partner on the side. Oh, I'm so abused by my spouse. They're so horrible. It's this awful relationship. That person is a psychopath. And you get into the relationship with them further. And sometimes that's true and they were abused. And sometimes you're like, oh, the person that you're married to is a saint. As close to a saint as possible, and I can't believe that you portrayed them that way just to try to get me to be in an illicit relationship with you.
Yeah, they can be so manipulating. Yeah, there goes that using your honesty and your compassion. That's what I was saying before, is that my compassion was used against me, and I was lied to many times just to get me. Basically, what happens is they know that your compassion is going to override your hurt feelings and your distrust of them. So when they've done something bad, they can turn it around and key into your compassionate side and know that your compassion is so big that it's going to make up for the horrible thing that they just did to you. So it's not even like you're forgiving them for what they did. It's just that they've told you some story that's so horrible. And this is why they reacted the way they did. And they didn't mean to yell at you, or they didn't mean to this, but this happened to me. And this is why I did that. And so it immediately hooks into your compassion, and you just go into compassion mode, and you're much more willing to forgive them for these horrible things that they've done to you. So it's really sneaky how they use it against you. It really is.
Yeah. I've seen so many people that were having an affair that come in here for therapy or things like that. And I asked them, well, how did you get involved with that person? Well, my husband just doesn't listen to me, but this friend at work, he just cares and listens to how I feel, and he does this and he does that, and then they, I tell them, well, there's a good chance that he's, conning you, and well, he's not. I said, well, here's what you need to do. Just don't allow there to be any romantic relationship. No sex involved, and it's better to break it off altogether, of course, but have them start there. And as soon as they, refuse to have sex or the other romantic things, they get ditched. So all of a sudden, this caring person quits being caring, because he was using it to get what he wanted. And people are shocked, that there's so many fakes out there.
Yeah, I've had somebody that I was holding his hand because I really felt for this story that he was telling me about how he was abused as a child. And I was holding his hand like, we're going to pray together about this. We're going to talk about this. I feel for you. And the minute that he realized that I was not going to have an affair with him, he literally, the crocodile tears that were coming down his cheeks and somehow magically dried up. And he literally threw my hand out of his hand and threw it back at my body.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa.
Hey, maybe that was an honest narcissist. He was letting you know how he really felt.
He didn't say anything. It was like, oh, I put all this time in and nothing's going to happen. Just, ugh. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, well now, then I was crushed. Like, I thought we were friends. And then now I'm like, whatever, I wouldn't even. Anyway, number 6, your desire to heal others and fix people. That you can't. I don't even want to start that one off. Paul, you take that one to start off.
That's a big one. Boy, narcissists, they love fixers and healers and people that have empathy and stuff, and around them they'll tell their sob stories and act like only you can heal them, and they've got this addiction or that addiction, but they just need somebody to love them, and boy, they will really suck you into a relationship. Alcoholics will find somebody that wants to rescue an alcoholic, like somebody who had an alcoholic parent, and they'll get in enabling relationships where they might even get married to that person, and that person will like the wife. Let's say the wife's the one that's not the alcoholic, but she'll go to work. I'm thinking of an actual case right now where we call her the church lady. That was the nickname that I called her. She'd go to church, Sunday morning. She was one of those that goes to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and her husband, and she worked, and he never worked. She paid all the bills. He didn't do anything except drink. And when she brought her check home, he'd use half of it to get alcohol. And he would hit her and beat her and stuff. And she'd come to a prayer meeting and talk about how much abuse she had suffered. And one time she went to church, and I think she had her arm in a sling or something. And she shared how much she was suffering and prayed for her husband. He was trying to change him. And the pastor got tired of hearing this, and he went out with her to the home and really chewed the guy out and laid it on the line and told him what he thought. And the guy actually changed. He actually became a believer and went into counseling, and he grew, and he ended up getting a job. Then he ended up going into business for himself. And a few years later, after therapy, he was a deacon in the church, and he had sincerely become a good person, and he was a good dad. He was a good husband, and she got clinically depressed, and because she was so used to being the healer, that it depressed her not to be the healer, and she came into our day program, and one of the first things she did was almost start an affair with another alcoholic that had checked into the day program.
Gosh. Wow.
Because she wanted, and she had never had an affair before, but she wanted to have an affair, and that's what 50% of the time, if somebody's codependent, an enabler, and they're married to an alcoholic, if there's a divorce, at least half the time or more, they'll marry another alcoholic. And if an alcoholic goes straight, over half the time, the person married to the alcoholic that put up with him all those years will divorce him when he goes straight and marry somebody else that's suffering. Mm-hmm. So that's what you call a codependency.
Yes, and, absolutely. And Melanie, you've talked about that desire to heal others and fix people, and I've said it too. I mean, I was applying for sainthood and martyrdom, and it was narcissistic behavior of my own to think that was to bury myself in the fixing of others instead of because it was a way for me to not really look at myself. Now, I give myself not a pass, but I understand why I did those things, and we all come to our awakenings and our healings in different ways. But it was a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow when I had to look at it and go, okay, I can't just blame the other person for this because I really participated in it.
Yeah, well, I mean, to your defense, I just think by nature, some of us are healers. This is why we have doctors like Dr. Meier and physicians and counselors and people that do acupuncture and massage. And there are people in this world that are healers. This is biblically based. Some of us just have that heart, and we have to, be authentic and be honest and be that person. So, but sometimes, just like every trait, it can get to the wrong end of the spectrum. So, right. And I think it's done for different reasons. I think, some people are avoiding themselves. And I think for me, what I figured out was that my self-worth was caught up in my ability to help others. So that was also caught up in that thing. You don't want to walk away. Like, you don't want to walk away from someone because your self-worth is caught up in being a helper and a healer. So when I finally found my self-worth in Christ, which is where it should have been from the beginning, then I started to do less of those things that were really unhealthy. So, because if you're getting your esteem from helping others, then you see why you continue to do that. And then when you can't help someone, then it's such a blow to your ego, because that's where your self-worth is caught up. So when I finally was able to, define my self-worth in something different, that I didn't have to help anyone, then my helping of other people became something much more authentic and pure, because I wasn't doing it to gain self-worth. I was doing it because I truly cared about someone else. And that's much more powerful than the other. I'm not saying I never helped anyone, because I think I did. I think I helped a lot of people. But when it comes from a different place, I think it's just a lot healthier. Does that make sense? I'm interested to hear what Paul has to say about that, because I know you're a
yeah, that's really good. And I know when I was in residency, if I tried to help somebody and they wouldn't change, I'd feel really sad.
Yep.
And it would really, it would ruin my day, and my professors would notice that, and they'd say, that's not healthy. That there might be, different motives involved in there, in you healing them. And if you care about people, you need to do it in a mature way where you show, empathy for them, and you listen to them, and you share things that you think will help them. But it's up to them whether to apply it or not.
Yeah.
And you don't take it home with you, and you don't feel like you're worthless if you can't persuade them to change. It is sad when you see people that could really be helped, and they just refuse to do it. When I started out, it was especially sad when you'd see somebody that was married to a real abusive jerk, that was hurting them and raping them, even nightly, and beating them and all that. And they'd finally get to a point in therapy where they'd break up with that person and make progress for 2 or 3 months in a row. And you'd feel so good about yourself for helping them. And then they'd run back to them.
I've had that happen. It is so hard to deal with, because there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. But, I need to do what I can and let people choose what they choose. And it doesn't mean I'm less empathetic, but, I don't have to base my self-worth on whether I can heal everybody or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the last one on the list is 7, you have trouble setting boundaries. And let me tell you, I didn't even know what a boundary was about some things. And boundaries are, it's not like you have one boundary and that means you're covered in every other area of your life. Boundaries are a constant thing that you're working on, and I could be very well boundaried about specific things, and then this open, very naive person and not skilled at all at setting boundaries, at saying no, and all of those things as an adult. And certainly as a child, my boundaries were crossed again and again and again by people that I, should have been able to trust. So it was really difficult for me to not tie my self-worth to how I perceived I was pleasing others. And pleasing others meant, not having boundaries often. And it was a lot of knocks around to my self-esteem, and a lot of painful things that went on throughout my life that taught me about how to set boundaries that were healthy. So Paul, what do you say about that?
I want everybody to like me. And I didn't have very many. I'm still learning how to have better boundaries, but I remember, when I became a doctor, then, any friends and some relatives that would go out to eat with me always expected me to pick up the bill, and so of course I always did. And even I remember there was even a guy in our there were a couple of guys, and we had a growth group at church, and there were a couple of people that would always want to have lunch with me, and I said, sure, or have breakfast. Yeah, let's go have breakfast. And there's one guy that always forgot his wallet. Every single time he'd use the same excuse. I forgot my wallet. You'd think, after a while, why? How could he forget his wallet 12 times in a row? But and then there was another one that would always borrow money and never repay it. And yet every time he asked me to borrow money, deep down I knew he was. Deep down I knew he was probably never going to repay it. But in my head, I kept trying to convince myself, well, he is. He just can't right now. You know what I mean? And so I didn't have boundaries, and I let people take advantage of me. Part of it probably was I don't know what all the reasons were.
Well,
I sure had trouble with boundaries. Now I'm a lot better at it.
Yeah, and I think it goes right to what you said. You want people to like you, and setting boundaries can make people not like you for a minute or two. And if they're if they're someone that can take it, sometimes it's in the delivery of the boundary too that helps. You learn how to set your boundaries in ways that aren't like are nails on a chalkboard as you get better at having them. But if you're tied to people pleasing, saying no it's hard, because it's hard to sit with somebody being upset with you or to causing an uncomfortable situation.
Yeah. You'd almost rather get taken advantage of than to have a sociopath not like you. That's a little bit sick,
Oh boy.
That's a mental illness that I've got.
Same here, Paul. Same here. Mel, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm sitting here thinking, and again, maybe I've had problems with boundaries in my life, but my experiences as a child actually gave me really strict boundaries. And so this was kind of opposite. So instead of me just folding and not having any, I had really strict ones. And what happened to me in the relationship with a narcissist is that when I put up boundaries, I was made to feel guilty about it. So I kept putting up boundaries, and then I got told that I wasn't being Christ-like when I put up a boundary.
Exactly.
Or I was being unforgiving, or I was being a B, ITCA, I was whatever it was. So I was made to feel guilty about the boundaries that I had. So then I became fearful to put up boundaries at all. And so it wasn't that I didn't have boundaries. It was that when I put boundaries up that were perfectly healthy and safe in a healthy relationship, I was made to feel guilty about it. And so sometimes it's not that you don't have the boundaries, is that you're kind of talked out of them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I finished my residency at Duke, I went and taught a seminary. And I grew up in a church. It had a lot of good parts of it, but I grew up with the feeling that anything anybody asked you to do was an opportunity to serve God, and that you ought to do it. You ought to do anything anybody asks you to do so that you can be Christ-like, like you were just talking about. You know what I mean? So I taught the seminary, and I saw students and their wives for free on weeknights for marriage counseling, and I did charitable work in the ghetto on Saturday mornings, and I spoke in churches on Sunday, and I wasn't spending enough time with my own kids, and I was getting up every morning early to have devotions, and I was getting depressed, and I was, I just didn't know how much longer I could take being a good Christian. Maybe I have to give up Christianity or something. And I came across that verse where Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light."
Yeah.
And I remember, throwing my Bible down on the bed and where I was kneeling and shaking my fist and saying, "Heavenly Father, how can you say this? How can you say that your burden is easy? It's overwhelming me. I'm getting burned out." And that's when I called up my buddy Frank Miners, who was my cadaver mate in medical school, and I was in Chicago at the time. He was in Dallas, and that's, and I've shared this story before, but that's when he said, "Well, you think God's a German immigrant because your dad was a German immigrant, and no matter what you did, it wasn't quite enough." And so he said, if the Bible says that God's yoke is easy and its burden is light, then it is. And so I figured it out, when he pointed out that a lot of things I was doing I wasn't doing them as God called me to do them. I thought he called me to do all those things. And so I gave up about half or more of the things and just did a few things well. And people that I'd been doing them for laid a guilt trip on me. And so what you just shared, Melanie and Kristin, reminded me of that they said, well, people would ask me to speak in churches, and I'd say, no, I'm going to church with my own family. And, oh, you're not going to speak in churches anymore? What kind of seminary are you? And or students, would want counseling, and I didn't have time to counsel them. And I'd say, here's some places you can go to get counseling. And I actually, heaven forbid, quit doing charity work in the ghetto on Saturday mornings. And instead I spent Saturday mornings with my kids. And so I had to work through, for a while, I had a lot of false guilt. I'd feel guilty for not doing those things that I had learned all my life, that you got to do everything that you're asked to do. But when I slowed down and did a few things well, that's when I ended up, writing 100 books and doing all the other stuff that I could do because I had to. So it was an important lesson.
Channeling that energy, that energy that you have that's tour de force, and putting it into other things that weren't so draining. Yeah, I've had that too, where anytime I put up a boundary, I would be screamed at, told I was being abusive. Someone that had just been screaming at me, just completely slamming a door open that I'm in a private room or a bathroom, screeching at me or yelling or whatever. And when I very sternly would say, "This is not okay. Get out of this room," the tactic was, "Oh, you're being abusive to me."
Yeah.
I was like, what? So when, you start seeing the ridiculousness of it. And sometimes I have to say, I do watch now when people come in and they are trying to sell me something, or they're trying to use the network in some way that they think it's some big cash cow. And I'm like, it's an advocacy organization. I don't know what you think you're going to get out of it by this, but if you kind of sit back and you give someone enough rope to hang themselves, which sounds awful, but I think everybody knows what I mean by that well-known statement. It's kind of interesting to me to watch their shtick because each narcissist has a shtick, and to kind of watch how other people interact with them, watch what they say, watch how they change their language, because in the moment that they're speaking to me, they're trying to figure me out in order to manipulate me further. And it's really interesting to be having a conversation with someone that is actively trying to manipulate you in awful ways to use you, and you're sitting in the conversation with them going, Now I know you, Melanie, and you, Paul, deal with this as, doing counseling, you deal with this, but people that aren't counselors, that are trained in that in a counseling room, it's utterly fascinating to sit there and go, so that's their little deal. Gotcha. Okay. Well, now I'm going to start figuring out how to walk out of this relationship peacefully.
Yeah, that's where experience comes in handy. None of us want to get burned.
Right.
But if you never got burned, then you're going to, when I have somebody that's young, a college student or somebody that got manipulated by a narcissist and they're depressed over it, and I tell them, well, I never want anybody to suffer, and I hate to see you suffering, but in a way it's really good that it happened now, because maybe they were engaged to that person, and
right.
Isn't that great that it happened now instead of after you got married? And they say, well, I never thought of it that way. I said, I'm sorry that it happened. It's horrible. I hate to see you go through the pain. But boy, it would have been much worse 3 years from now.
Right.
And,
yeah, you can find some good, things about it. You learned lessons. You sharpened the tools that you use to protect yourself in the future. You're wiser. You didn't fall off a Cabbage Patch truck. You did for a while, and now you're really, you're driving the Cabbage Patch truck now. And I found, the last thing I'll say is this, and I want to see what you guys think about this, but sometimes they really think that you're the mouse in the bathtub running around, and the cat is playing with you, and they believe that they're the cat. But as you wise up to this, and I'm not saying this works with all of them, because some of them are pretty darn good, but after a while, it's not that you become the cat, but you don't run around in the bathtub for them anymore. So you're not fun to play with. And you can kind of figure out how to manipulate them. Not even kind of, you do figure out how to manipulate them. And for one reason only, to get them out of your life as peacefully as possible. And so you kind of use some of their tactics yourself, not to hurt them, but just a little bit. You figure out how you can manipulate them. I do anyway, if I can, in order to I don't want this person in my life that this person isn't coming from a healthy place. I don't want them in my life. And so I can see how they try to manipulate me, and I will flip the script and use that as a way to peacefully have them gone from my experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. When you
Yes.
do not put up with it. And the Bible even says that, if you rebuke a wise man, he'll love you for it. So have friends that you can confront, and they'll love you more for confronting him than they did before. But if you rebuke a fool or an immature person or a narcissist, they'll hate you for it. And it says in Proverbs 9, Solomon said, so don't waste your time with them.
Yes.
Don't get away from that person. Don't waste your time with that person, because you're just going to get hurt.
And they don't like it when you figure them out, and you want to exit that as peacefully as possible, because they do hurt. They lash out. And when they lash out, because you're saying no, it's awful. And so I like to have those exits be as peaceful. They don't always have to be an apocalypse. So Melanie, last words on this.
Well, what we're talking about right now, I'll just say Shahida Arabi, How to Be the Narcissist's Worst Nightmare, basically is what you're talking about, right?
Right.
And that's an author, Paul, that we've interviewed on the show, and that's the name of her book. And that is definitely one of the tactics, is that basically you kind of sometimes have to learn how to feed a narcissist's ego and that's the best way to get out of the relationship, or to manipulate them in a way that they're not going to be looking for, because they're so used to you being you. They're so used to you being authentically you. When you can step back and actually start fighting fair, because for so long you haven't even been fair to yourself, because you're fighting the devil, and it's just not worth. So when you can wise up and know your enemy, you can truly back your way out of these relationships in a safe way. I do believe that. So
Yeah, I don't want to be their nightmare. Like I've learned, I don't want to be their nightmare. They're already a nightmare. I just want to get out of the relationship and with
peacefully.
Yep.
At least energy as needed. I get it.
So if somebody needs to think that I'm dumb, that I'm really easily fooled, that I'm whatever it is that they need to think about me in order for me to peacefully exit, I don't care what they think about me at all. And if they need to think that, I'm so okay with my ego that it doesn't bother me that they think that. I don't have to like prove them wrong and point out their faults and point out how I figured out they were manipulating me. I used to do that. Now I'm like, I don't care. Fine, go off on your way. I'm sorry you're going to go do this to someone else. Think that you really snowed me and I'm really dumb and I don't care. I just am glad that you're not here anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that doesn't sound Christian, but it is Christian, or whatever religion people are that are listening to it.
Yes.
Not that everybody's Christian that's listening to us, but you're a moral. It doesn't sound moral to have that attitude, but it really is moral to not get manipulated by people that are just going to waste your energy and your time, as they're taking away the time that you could spend with people that will really benefit from your love and compassion and effort.
Do you think, Paul, and I know maybe this becomes another topic, maybe we'll do this on the next show. Do you think that has a little bit or something to do with what really, truly turning the other cheek means?
Well, turning the other cheek, I think that gets really misinterpreted.
I agree.
Yeah, I do too.
If that passage is talking about if somebody slaps you in the face for your beliefs, for your religious beliefs, then turn the other cheek and let them slap your other cheek too. But if somebody walks up and slaps you in the face because they feel like hitting you, I think you ought to, really knock the living daylights out of them.
I got that one wrong.
And there's person I back that up too. If somebody breaks into your house, then you're lucky if you're a strong man and you can, beat them up and get them out. And there's people that believe that verse means there's whole religions that are pacifists and believe that you should never fire a gun, you should never hit back. And well, how long would America last if we had that attitude?
Right.
A day, a week, maybe a month. Right. We'd be taken over.
Right.
If they could just come take us over, they'd take us over if we didn't fight back. So that's what turning the cheek doesn't just mean if somebody walks up to you and slaps you, you should turn your cheek. But if they slap because of your religious beliefs, then turn the cheek in order to show them something about your faith that you're willing to.
Okay. I was thinking of it in terms of turning the other cheek too. I don't need, if someone slaps me emotionally because they're trying to hurt me, and they're someone who behaves in a predatory way or they are very narcissistic, I don't need to engage in that and slap them back to try to win the argument or prove anything. I can turn the other cheek and walk away and go, I don't care.
Maybe call the police depending on what they did.
Yeah, well, if it's just like verbal, whatever. I'm talking
verbal.
About, you just psychological.
Just get away from them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You don't want to get in fight with a narcissist.
Right. You don't want to have two cats in a two feral
Yeah,
cats in a
yeah.
bag. Just they can go in the bag and play with themselves and draw their own blood. And you've walked away and you're not, you never entered the bag with them.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, then I think that's good. We took this from the article that Kim Saeed wrote that is about the 7 most empathetic
Make you vulnerable to narcissistic manipulation.
Yes. There you go. Thank you. Thank you both for coming on and doing a show.
It's good to talk to you guys.
And thanks to our listeners for another edition of Mental Health News Radio.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meier Clinics, please visit our website at meierclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.